Welcome to the Football Guys Dynasty Show. It's me, your professional nerd, and then our Dynasty captain, Jeff Bell. And we talked about contending Dynasty rosters. Now we're going to go on the other side, and then we're going to look at the pretenders, or your 0 and 3, or 1 and 3, or you're panicking and what you're going to do. So we'll go over the first roster, and we already kind of talked about it. Our buddy Joey Wright, and he has what's crazy when I pulled up his team, it's not a bad team. It's just not scoring points. He has C.J. Stroud, Jared Goff, then he has Bryce Young, R.I.P. Jordan Travis, Joe Milton, and Stetson Bennett. That's not a bad QB room. Thank God that Bryce Young is his QB3 and he doesn't have to start him, but that's looking like a troubling asset. His running backs, J.K. Dobbins, Jahmyr Gibbs, Zamir White, Ezekiel Elliott, and Jalen Warren. Then his receiving room is Christian Kirk, Chris Godwin, Brian Thomas Jr., Christian Watson, Malachi Corley, Troy Franklin, Ray McLeod, Jahan Dotson, rest in peace. I think I got sniped on that. Then for tight end, Trey McBride. I love that he has the Elijah Higgins handcuff there. Britton Strange, Kobe Parkinson, and Chiga Okonkwo. He still has all of his draft picks as well. But this is like an 0-3 roster. Jared Goff has started weak. CJ Stroud. Me and Jeff are kind of talking pre-show that these quarterbacks that we know that are studs and we know they're great, it's to tell us oldest time about the Konami code. Is that, yeah, you kind of, it's not even a code anymore. It should be a Konami rule that to have this elite production, you have to have rushing value. So that's why I struggle there, even though I still think that that's pretty strong. So with that being said, Jeff, what would you do if you're Joey if you have this roster now? Like it's in decent shape. It's not one I think he needs to tear the guts out. It's not particularly old.
Yeah, I think he ran into. I mean, this happens, but when you're doing a startup, so he drafted Bryce Young, which is a premium-ish asset to grab Bryce Young, where you're grabbing him in a startup, and that's basically a dead asset for the time being. And so that's a killer. He's got Jalen Warren, who had decent draft capital. Zamir White had a little bit stronger draft capital. Some of those types of moves, he got a little bit bailed out with J.K. Dobbins. But when you
Mm-hmm.
take a Zamir White, who isn't really playable, and you take, Jalen Warren, who's been injured, again, you're thinking that those are win now assets that are going to be players that you're playing weekly that you're not really getting it weekly. And so then obviously Trey McBride's injured. You can't really do much about that. Talking about CJ Stroud and even Jared Goff, like it's one of those that you have quarterback production, but you didn't draft like Josh Allen. Just like you didn't draft Lamar Jackson. You didn't draft the guy that is going to have the 35, 40-point spike week randomly that's going to win you 3 weeks by themselves as a top end asset. And so that's where it's the double edged coin here on Stroud, where we feel great about him hitting as a long term fantasy quarterback, but at the same time, he's probably realistically going to be a long term quarterback 12 type player, not quarterback 2 type player. And you're taking that into your first round as your startup, and you're buying the youth there, and but you're not getting the high upside. And I think his biggest problem that as you look through the team, he's got Jahmyr Gibbs, who does give you a little bit of upside, though apparently the Lions are no longer allowed to throw Jahmyr Gibbs the ball, which is disappointing. But who's the player that's going to win you a week? I guess is kind of the question. And really, when I'm building a fantasy roster, I want 5 or 6 players that are going to win me a week. And once I start stacking those players on top of each other, then you have enough good high potential to win you enough weeks that you're hoping to patch over some of those weak spots week to week with solid production. But also you create the chain effect that everything hits at once, and you've got a very high end roster. And that's the biggest thing here with Joey's roster is I don't know who the high end piece is right now. The other problem is he's kind of not really telling a cohesive story, I guess is kind of the way that I would say it, where you kind of got Christian Kirk and Brian Thomas and even Bretton Strange all in the lineup together. So you're kind of putting a lower ceiling on yourself in this week or even week to week playing both Kirk and Brian Thomas, you've got different receivers that are in different areas of their career, where you've got Kirk and Chris Godwin are kind of at the this end of the production curve and Brian Thomas is at this end of the production curve. And I usually, when I'm in a startup, I'll draft young aggressively, and maybe that's just because I'm an ageist, but at the same time I want to tell a cohesive story with that dynasty team where I've got all these guys are the same age, and then I'm adding young rookies onto that. And in year 2, 3, 4, 5, now I've got an entire group of guys that are in the prime of their production window trying to win together. And then as I start to feel like some of those are reaching that tail end, I'll start to reset a little bit and roll it back. But when you're kind of doing that out of a startup, you kind of are trying to play both sides, I guess.
Yeah, and that's like, and I know there's like a big thing about like, being a rebuilder and how like you rebuild too long, and that's the whole point is knowing when to stop rebuilding. And
Yeah.
we brought that up last episode with the like pretending roster, or excuse me, contending roster is just like you made the point, Jeff, is like you want like to me you want 4 or 5 players that are top 12 in their position. You want 3 guys that are probably top 5 in their position, and that's the goal that you want to be at, and that's like, and this is a good point. Like, I know this is a basketball term, but Joey's team are kind of reminds me of like the Thunder before like Shea Gilgeous-Alexander was good, kind of where like you got these teams that have like a really good foundation. You got all these players, but you don't have like a good anchor piece. I know a lot of people think that's C.J. Stroud, but again, that is putting your football brain into fantasy. And CJ Stroud, I think you should bake in job security a little bit into the price, especially when you think about him versus like Anthony Richardson and whatnot. I'm definitely not ready to put Anthony Richardson ahead of him just because he runs, because I don't know how long he's going to be in the league compared to Stroud. But like going out and getting an anchor piece, I would use CJ Stroud to do that for. Even if you could probably go get another modest quarterback and get a stud wide receiver in a package deal. Let's say you take CJ Stroud and Chris Godwin right now. You could probably go get, is it crazy to go get someone like Baker Mayfield and then pair that with like a stud wide receiver on another team? And I guess let's just go back here and look at the other teams with QBs. You got Mr. QB Coatsy here. You know, maybe trade him, go get Justin Fields. And, he needs a wide receiver too, so he may not be the guy. But, like, look at someone like that, to go get a QB plus a wide receiver and then send them another one of your wide receivers back for an upgrade. Is that something that you would do, or is that too risky for a piece like CJ Stroud?
That's probably too risky for me on CJ Stroud. And I think I don't I try to look at blue chip, kind of like try to separate what blue chip you have on your roster. And I think CJ Stroud, Jameer Gibbs, maybe Brian Thomas, and maybe Trey McBride are the only are 4 blue chip pieces, and those are the only blue chip pieces on the roster. And so that's where some of the, if I'm not winning right now, I'm looking to trade J.K. Dobbins, or I'm looking to do those, some of those types of things. And ideally, I always think of it just in blue chip. Basically, is kind of the best way to think about it. And if I've got a
Mm,
roster where I've got 10 blue chips, I'm feeling pretty good about that team. And I'm still trying to get an 11th blue chip and a 12th blue chip. And so that's where I just think it's when you go through and you take CJ Stroud and Jameer Gibbs to start your dynasty team, you're leaning hard towards youth. And so you've really either got to hit the other youth parts early to be able to build around, grow with those guys, and then transition to older players to have some production, or you kind of get stuck in the middle. And I feel like that's kind of happened what happened with Joey. And again, when you take a piece like Jared Goff, to me, like, I don't know that Jared Goff pairs well with CJ Stroud, I guess, kind of in a
yeah.
startup
You got
where,
two yins or two yangs or something.
and it's kind of one of those things where if I'm using my first pick on CJ Stroud, I'm buying CJ Stroud as that first pick because of the youth that comes with CJ Stroud. It's different than if I'm buying Josh Allen, where I might feel a little bit more comfortable going with a Saquon Barkley or an AJ Brown or those types of players. The primary reason why I'm buying Stroud up there is because I know he's going to be my quarterback for the next 15 years. And so I'm accepting that I'm getting a lower ceiling relative to a Lamar Jackson because I'm paying for the future longevity. So on those types of rosters, I'm going to make sure that I have a lot of longevity.
And see, like I try to like play matchmaker with Joey here. Like Drew P here has Caleb Williams, Jordan Love, and that's it. So you know that he's probably 0-3, or or maybe 1-2 at best. I would, but he's not a good partner here. Like, what are you going to get? Like, I might try to buy Caleb Williams with C.J. Stroud, because I think at the end of the day,
Well, I think you're
like,
looking at the wrong end there because I would be looking to pair Caleb Williams with CJ Stroud and be looking to move Jared Goff and like sell high on Chris Godwin or something like that to kind of say, maybe he's willing to move off of, maybe he's nervous about Caleb Williams, or maybe he's 2-1, but he realizes Caleb Williams isn't giving him that production. But also, I'm going to walk in here and I'm going to give you Chris Godwin, who's been the top 5 wide receiver this year. And okay, now all of a sudden you've got some real firepower, and maybe Caleb Williams isn't the elite fantasy prospect that I was hoping that he would be, but at least Jared Goff is going to give me what Caleb Williams is giving me, and so that's where, and then I'm resetting as Joey, and I've so all of a sudden I've got Jahmyr Gibbs, Brian Thomas, Caleb Williams, and CJ Stroud. Okay, now I've got my 2 young quarterbacks. I've got the young developing wide receiver, and I've got the running back that I like. Okay, I've got some core pieces here. And with Trey McBride, I got some core pieces here. And so then I'm going to look to add that 6th piece as a top 3 rookie pick, basically. Or like, can I throw Marvin Harrison into this lineup? Can I throw Malik Neighbors onto this team?
and that's, and one reason I picked Caleb Williams is like looking at his roster. If I'm 0-3, why would I want to buy Jared Goff? Is like the only reason why. Like
Well, if
that's
I'm 0
why.
3, I'm not going to trade Caleb Williams. So,
That's yeah, and that's why like I feel like, well, you might for C.J. Stroud, just because you still have the youth, and again, people are being silly about Caleb Williams. I'm not saying you are, Drew P, but like let's just say a fictional person, it would maybe sell him. And I guess where I'm at is just like sometimes you don't have like a good match, and that's kind of where the full rebuild happens for me, is where like I can't make the moves that I want to do, so I kind of need to reset my board and do what you're saying is like you're trying to find blue chips. Then you're trying to land like a Marvin Harrison Jr. You're trying to land a Malik Neighbors. Next class may not have that at wide receiver. I mean, like Ted McMillan's pretty good. Travis Hunter's pretty good, but it may not have like a Malik Neighbors quality player. But you might have someone that is a foundational piece. So try to go get it there. So I don't know, like moving Jared Goff. I think that would be your full rebuild move, is like try to find a contender at that point, and then move Goff for a receiver, and then like I know this is like you're playing chess at that point, but like move Goff to get a wide receiver, then try to move Godwin to go get like a Justin Fields quarterback or something like that. That's what I would try to do. I don't know, maybe that's crazy doing it that way, but because I would
no,
still buy Justin Fields at that point.
yeah. And again, missing on the Bryce Young pick shades it a lot because um, if that's a hit, then you're feeling like, okay, now I've got Bryce Young and I've got CJ Stroud. I'm locked in at young quarterback. I've got 2 cornerstone pieces here. I took the risk. I bought the discount on Young, but that hit. It didn't. And that's one of the most difficult things in a startup is when you're looking at those players, especially those players in the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th round that are immediate misses. That's a brutal thing to come back from relative to somebody that in the 8th, 9th, 10th round added a couple of impact players that should have been in the 4th round.
Yeah, yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me. Um, we'll quit ripping. We'll quit ripping on Joey's team, and
We
we'll
get to rip on
move.
my team.
Yeah, and then we'll rip on like on my team. This first Dynasty League, this first Listener League, me and Jeff were shook. Like y'all came in and like you opened up a can on us. We weren't ready. We couldn't make any moves, and you could tell who really listened. who really listened to the show here because they did all the moves against us. I We'll start with Jeff's team. He has Patrick Mahomes, Jared Goff, Michael Penix. And as we talked about like the yin and yang thing, I see what you did at quarterback. You're like, I can win with Mahomes, Jared Goff, but I have Michael Penix that could be a lottery pick that happens or later, or I don't know, maybe you didn't. But then your running backs, Deontay Foreman, Miles Sanders, Will Shipley, really, Alexander Madison is your most productive running back at this point, or Tank Bixby. Your wide receivers, Marvin Harrison Jr., Quentin Johnston, Khalil Shakir, Jacoby Myers, Keon Coleman. Then you have Sam Laporte to Isaiah Likely. And Johnny Smith as your third. I don't hate that. But here's where you did well. You have two first, 3 seconds, and a third rounder. So you have a lot of youth. Arguably, you could sell Patrick Mahomes right now for a haul if you really wanted to the right person. Is that something that you would do with this roster?
You know, I mean, maybe I need to think about that. I mean,
Yeah,
if I can
it's like
that well, but I'm the type that I would be loath to sell a player like Patrick Mahomes. Like it's, I don't know. I'm very much once I got the blue chip, I've got the blue chip until I decide he's not going to be blue chip anymore, and I'm going to hope to try to sell him at blue chip price. Is kind of the way that I end up approaching Dynasty, and really what happened. This was the first startup I had done in months. I got a little bit aggressive to go get Mahomes, and I gave up a fourth round pick, and then I got a little bit antsy coming back, and I saw Jared Goff kind of on the board as a quarterback that there was a bit of a fall off after Jared Goff. And so I went back up to get him in the fourth. And so I ran into a situation where I started to basically kind of pull pieces to like move the board and move up. And the Jenga tower starts to get a little bit shaky at that point. And then the Jenga tower collapses at some point. And that's, ideally I've got Patrick Mahomes. I've got a good quarterback two with Jared Goff. I've got high upside, hopefully with Michael Penix. I've got Marvin Harrison. So ideally, hopefully a high upside there. Sam Laporta, I'm not getting the production there, but that's hopefully the tight end one in Dynasty when I drafted him. Keon Coleman, I guess, is like my wide receiver too, which is rough. I mean, that's the biggest thing. Like when you start to pull those Jenga pieces and you start to move around the board, and particularly when you're moving up on the board and you're missing those Tank Dells or those, where Nico Collins is a great value, or those Zay Flowers, and you're missing those guys as your wide receiver 2, 3, 4, 5, then you've got a pretty shaky foundation.
yeah. Yeah, and it's like it's a good thing that you do have those early firsts, and you right now you're in contention to have an early pick. It's like right now I think that like until the quarterback situation works itself out, like Quinn Ewers is QB1, and I guess like top of Superflex for me right now. But like Tet McMillan, I wouldn't hate anyone. Like that's pretty much one tier, and it's not like Caleb or bust like it was last year. So you could easily get like Tet McMillan in, and let's say he hits right away, like Harrison or Neighbors, and that fix part of the problem. If I would move my homes, I don't think they would do this, but if you could get Caleb Williams and Roman Dunze from this dude,
Yeah, I probably would trade Patrick Mahomes for Caleb Williams and Robert Dunze on this team.
no way he would do it because I don't think he's competitive right now because he has McConkey, Jennings. Adunze is like his wide receiver one. So
Yeah.
definitely playing for the future. So yeah, that's just like really hard to find. With quarterbacks, it's really hard to find a like a trade partner with unless it's just the ideal scenario, and then even then they might not value things the same way you do.
Well, and we know how rookie drafts usually kind of play out, where we get the six guys that you must have in every single rookie draft, and like we force it, even if there's not six guys that you must have. We invent that Jackson Smith and Jigba is a guy that you must have, or something to that extent. And then if you are patient and you're willing and you recognize that you're in a rebuilding situation and you land in those areas, and maybe you don't get the Caleb Williams or the Bijan Robinson, but maybe you're able to roll it forward and move back to pick 8 and get a future first and start to kind of build a snowball effect there. And I mean, I know you're in the prospecting game. That 27 draft class right now, with especially Jeremiah Smith, with Ryan
Ryan
Williams at
Williams.
the top there, with the mini Mahomes, with whatever it ends up being. I mean, just Jeremiah Smith and Ryan Williams, from what I've seen so far through a month of college football, are players that are going to be people are going to be nuking their rosters to try to get those two guys in 3 years.
Yeah. The, they will genuinely get silly with it. And I'm not saying they're not good players, but that is where we have a problem in Dynasty where, we're just constantly rebuilding. And that if that's the way you want to play, that's fine. If you're having fun and you're not hurting anybody, that's fine. If you just like, I know people who's like, I just like trading and I like collecting value. I don't care. He's a rich dude and he owns his own Dynasty site. If that's the way you want to play, that's the way you want to play. But
But
ideally, go
I
ahead.
think I think we've seen, especially like this past Caleb Williams. I've seen so many teams that they have nothing, that they have nothing, and it's like they just nuke themselves completely to just get Caleb Williams, and then it's
Hmm.
like, cool, you've got Caleb Williams, you also got nothing else. It's one of those things that you don't need to go to that extreme to end up with the number one pick.
Yeah. And I know that like, eh, and I think we've seen this shift. There's people that just like being in and I know we talked about this like at the beginning of the episode that you don't want to be in the middle. Yeah, you don't want to like be in the middle, but it's like you don't want to leave that roster with nothing to hold your hat on because like
Right.
it's like we were saying, you still need to start, you know, 10 to 12 or however big your starting rosters are players. And like, that's why when people will be like, well, 9 points is week is useless. It's not when you have to start 12 players, and you want some kind of value there or some type of trade chip. So it makes sense to me. And I agree with you, Jeff. A lot of my rosters, I tank for 1 year, and that's
Yeah.
that's mainly because I took an orphan that was just way aged out, and I had no choice but to strip it down. That's it. And then everything else, I'm just collecting at that point. I'm not trying to strip away anymore.
Yeah.
So that's it for Jeff's team. You have anything else you want to add here? Like I said, you got your team's pretty bare, so you're like next year you can you probably are playing for 2026 to be honest, where you're really contending. Like you can get some good pieces, and I mean you could nail it. I never want to say that, but realistically, to have everything, you might be like 2026, but you'll have a powerhouse. Next, my team's right next to you. I have Lamar Jackson, Gardner Minshew. When you talk about hitting or missing, my big miss is I took Drake May incredibly high, and that's not I would say a long-term miss, but that's definitely a short-term miss, and it's really hurt me. And I thought I could insulate that with Russell Wilson, but lo and behold, he's gimpy. And Gardner Minshew, I I took him because I was hoping to trade him, but lo and behold, I'm starting him. I'd still trade him, but I don't know when anybody would really pay for him. Then my running backs: Najee Harris, Tajay Spears, Trey Benson, Blake Corum, Kamani Vidal. Wide receiver Garrett Wilson. That's another thing that's hurting me. I took Garrett Wilson high. Right now, with the state of that offense, that hurts. Brian Thomas Jr., Jaden Reed, those were hits at cost. Michael Wilson hit at cost. Demario Douglas, fine at cost. Adonai Mitchell, Keenan Allen, those were kind of two misses. Noah Brown, Alec Pierce, that's something. Then I have Mark Andrews, Pat Fryermuth. I have all my. Nope, I'm missing a second round pick. I don't know what I spent it on, but I already regret it. Um, I'm pretty much staying put here. I like Garrett Wilson for what he is. I don't want to sell him. I don't want to sell Jaden Reed now. Matter of fact, I need to pull him off the block if I can, not from the desktop app. Michael Wilson, I might trade, but Keenan Allen, I definitely want to trade, but I have to wait on that game for it. Jeff, what are you trying to do with this roster?
I mean, Garrett Wilson's not delivered on what you would have hoped, but to have Garrett Wilson, Brian Thomas, and Jaden Reed as your three wide receivers, I would feel pretty good about that. Mark Andrews is just a killer because you know he's still valued as a premium, but he's also 28, 29 years old, and he's zero back to back weeks. And then the other thing that you kind of run into Where you got burned a little bit is like the Trey Benson, the Adnai Mitchell, and the Blake Corum, where that's like seventh, eighth, 10th round picks, where the people are taking legitimate starters there, and maybe those guys are in a year or two legitimate starters, but as rookies, you're drawing dead on all three of them, and so that's where you're taking higher end assets to select those players and you just can't do anything with them. And so once you kind of have those misses, I mean, if you're thinking about playing it out to 12 teams and 10 teams, 10 players in your starting lineup, ideally you're getting 10 starters through the first 10 rounds. Like half of your first 10 rounds are not starters. And so that's where it gets really tough. But again, you've got so much youth and the upside that you're paying the premium for that upside, and it can easily turn around because we see it all the time. We see it all the time, especially running backs like Corum or Trey Benson that we believe in, that are day two picks that are stuck for 1 year and then they get majorly discounted because people get impatient waiting on them. Then the next year, like who could have predicted that Trey Benson would be the starting running back with James Conner leaving the team? Like it's kind of one of those things.
Yeah. And that's what, like you said, it like I think I hit on Lamar and Jaden Reed and Brian Thomas, and then everything else at cost was a miss. If you could, with like the
I
redraft
don't
lens,
I
yeah,
don't think that I mean I'm still bullish on Garrett Wilson. I think people are I don't know. I don't really know what's going on with the Jets because it does. If the Jets were half as good as the Jets think they are, they would be one of the best teams in the league. But that's kind of what's going on there. But it does kind of seem like Aaron Rodgers is either trying to teach Garrett Wilson a lesson or he's trying to show Devontae Adams that there's plenty of targets for Devontae Adams in New York.
um, yeah. To be honest, I could tell you what's wrong with the Jets is that they run an ancient offense.
Yeah,
They run motion at one of the slowest rates. They don't move Garrett Wilson across the formation. That's what it is. That's where like one thing I've really learned in fantasy is specifically with the passing game is you actually I'll just say it all. You need this with any asset. You need the holy trinity. You need a decent quarterback, a competent quarterback. Let's just say you need a competent quarterback. You need quality wide receivers, and then you need quality coaching. That's what makes fantasy points. Like and if you don't have all three of those legs, you don't have an elite asset. You may have a a decent fantasy piece, but like someone like Garrett Wilson, he's never going to be elite without all three, or at least two of the three. I don't think he has two of the three, to be honest. Like, and you look at if you look at someone like Justin Jefferson, he's had elite play calling and he's had competent QB play for the most part. Like the bad Josh Dobbs weeks that are out there, Justin Jefferson wasn't out there, so you're missing one of those legs. So I'll
yeah.
keep buying, especially on rosters like this. Unfortunately, I can't buy Garrett Wilson hardly anymore because I own him the most. But it's probably time to sell Najee Harris if I can. I know that's crazy, but
Yeah,
like,
well, I mean, hate to be the bearer of bad news. You're 2 days late on the time to sell Najee Harris. I feel like because last week was Najee Harris week and we didn't get it.
yeah, yeah, that's fair. But
You can still
I,
tell him, I'm sure, but
yeah,
it's just like, and like, that's where I push back on everybody that believes it's a micro economy. Like, sure, I do believe that there are active enough dynasty leagues that you can take advantage of those. I think to the most part, the leagues that we play in, the people that we play with, are risk adverse to a fault. And when you're trying to sell Najee Harris leading up to the Colts game, they say you're trying to sell Najee Harris leading up to the Colts game. I'm not buying. And it's kind of like one of those things of we can talk all day long about hypothetical player values and buy high windows and whatever else, but in practice, people are so leery and so risk adverse to buying in a buy high window that really the only time you can make it happen is when you're buying high that's not really buying high yet.
yeah, I agree. Um, yeah, and I think that's where my second win is. I bought Najee Harris because like the Taji Spears news happened. Blake Corum didn't seem it was real. Trey Benson didn't happen. Kamani Vidal didn't happen. I think I remember drafting it and I said one of these four rookies will do something. And then
Yeah,
where I'm at.
which is like I think is very defensible. I think that that's a
Yeah.
very defensible thought to be, but and I think in a year it can look completely different. I know, like I had a home. dynasty draft that we did in 2020, and I loaded up on guys like Tony Pollard and AJ Dillon, like these other guys that were young at the time but were like 15th round picks, and they ended up returning value, and my team ended up very, very good. But
Mhm.
there was that first year I was starting like Dominic Rhodes basically at running back, like whatever I could find at running back, and then it takes a little bit of time to build that um, stable up.
Yeah, and that's one of those process over results thing that like I would
Yeah,
probably still make those bets again. Like I would probably draft this team the same way like all over again, knowing what I did now next year. Let's say, and I know that's crazy, but like I'm still gonna bet on talent like Garrett Wilson at cost. I would still buy Mark Andrews to go with Lamar Jackson. I,
yeah.
I had zero, with the exception of a car wreck, I had zero evidence that Mark Andrews' usage would be like this. There was
Nobody
no,
did
yeah, there was no sign of decline, nothing like that. I would still do that. I would, yeah, it's crazy that to think that in fantasy, and I know that's why some casuals get angry at us analysts because they're just like you were wrong. Why are you telling people to do this again? It's like, yeah, it's because it's a high variance game. Like,
that, and it's the process because you've
n-
seen the production and you've seen Mark Andrews be a difference making player in an offense that's allowed him to do that.
mhm.
It's the process.
Yep. With that being said, guys, that will be the end of this episode. And like, if you caught this one of just us talking about pretenders and what to do, we had another one with Victoria Geary where we talked about if you had a pretender and what to do, and then we had our Dynasty Risers and Fallers episode. As always, this is available on all platforms. Hit that like button, subscribe, go to footballguys.com/plans. We have plenty of written content over there for you. I'm working on rookie content. Jeff does a million articles about everything you want to talk about. And other than that, we'll see you guys on the next one.